The millionaire went to eat a pastry, and when he saw the pastry seller's necklace, he began to break into a cold sweat. It was simply the same necklace that he had given to his childhood girlfriend. Subscribe to the channel to follow more exciting stories like this one. The morning sun cast long shadows through the towering glass buildings of downtown Boston, reflecting off the polished windows of the Foster & Associates headquarters. Marcus Bennett stood at his corner office window, absently adjusting his perfectly knotted tie while observing the city coming to life 47 floors below. At 47, he had achieved everything society deemed successful. CEO of one of Boston's most prestigious real estate development firms, a penthouse in Beacon Hill, and a reputation for turning failing properties into gold mines. Yet on mornings like this, when the autumn air carried memories of years long past, something felt missing. Marcus ran his hand through his salt and pepper hair, a gesture that had become more frequent as the years passed. His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom, reminding him of his 9 a.m. meeting with the board. "The quarterly reports are ready, Mr. Bennett," Sarah's efficient voice announced. "And don't forget about the site visit to the Cambridge property this afternoon." Marcus acknowledged with a quick thanks, gathering his thoughts. The Cambridge development project was crucial, a historic building complex that needed complete renovation. It was exactly the kind of challenge he thrived on, transforming outdated structures into modern masterpieces while preserving their soul. The morning passed in a blur of meetings and conference calls, each decision adding another brick to his empire. By early afternoon, Marcus found himself in Cambridge, his driver navigating through the charming streets lined with centuries-old trees wearing their autumn colors. He had asked to be dropped off a few blocks from the property, preferring to walk and get a feel for the neighborhood. The crisp October air carried the scent of freshly baked goods, drawing his attention to a small pastry shop tucked between a bookstore and a vintage clothing boutique. "Sweet Dreams Patisserie," read the elegant sign above the door. Something about the warm light spilling from its windows made him pause. Through the large display window, he could see an array of artistically decorated cakes and pastries that looked more like edible art than mere desserts. "We should check if they cater," he mused aloud, thinking of the numerous corporate events his firm hosted. The bell above the door chimed softly as he entered, and the aroma of vanilla, chocolate, and freshly baked bread enveloped him. A young woman stood behind the counter, carefully piping delicate roses onto a wedding cake. Her movements were precise and graceful, each twist of her wrist creating perfect petals. She wore a pristine white chef's coat, her dark hair neatly tucked under a baker's cap. As she looked up to greet him, something caught the light, a silver necklace with a small, ornate locket. Marcus felt the world tilt slightly. That necklace. He knew every detail of its intricate design, the way the silver had been worked into delicate swirls, the small rose etched on its surface. He had spent weeks saving for it during his senior year of college, determined to give Sarah James something special for their first anniversary. The young woman, her name tag read Emma, smiled professionally. "Welcome to Sweet Dreams. How can I help you today?" Marcus barely heard her words, his eyes fixed on the necklace. It couldn't be the same one. Sarah had sworn she'd never take it off, and that was 23 years ago, before he left for his internship in Boston, before their tearful goodbye at the bus station in their small Pennsylvania town, before unanswered letters gave way to silence and life moved forward without looking back. "Sir?" Emma's voice brought him back to the present. She was looking at him with a mixture of concern and curiosity, one hand unconsciously touching the locket. "I'm sorry," Marcus managed, his throat suddenly dry. "That necklace..." Emma's hand closed protectively around the locket. "Oh, this? It was my mother's. She gave it to me on my 18th birthday." Her voice held a note of pride mixed with something deeper, more personal. "Your mother," Marcus repeated softly, his mind racing. Would her name happen to be Sarah? "Sarah James?" The young woman's eyes widened slightly, her professional smile fading. "How do you know my mother's name?" Marcus gripped the edge of the counter, steadying himself. The timing fit, the necklace. The resemblance he could now see clearly. Sarah's eyes, her delicate features softened by what must be traits from his own family line. "Because," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, I was the one who gave her that necklace. 23 years ago. Emma's face paled, her hand tightening around the locket until her knuckles turned white. The piping bag she held in her other hand trembled slightly, threatening to mar the perfect roses she had created moments before. 1,000 questions seemed to pass behind her eyes, but before she could voice any of them, the bell above the door chimed again as new customers entered the shop. The spell broke. Emma straightened, her professional mask sliding back into place, though her hand remained on the locket. "I have customers to attend to, sir," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "I think you should leave." Marcus nodded slowly, understanding the need for space, even as every fiber of his being wanted to stay, to talk, to understand. He pulled out a business card and placed it on the counter. "Please," he said softly, "when you're ready to talk, call me. There's so much I need to know." As he walked out into the autumn afternoon, Marcus felt as though his carefully constructed world had shifted on its axis. The Cambridge property, the board meetings, the quarterly reports, all of it seemed distant and unimportant compared to the weight of what he had just discovered. A daughter. He had a daughter, and she had been wearing the key to this revelation around her neck all along. Emma's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She had managed to maintain her composure through the rest of her shift, mechanically decorating cakes and serving customers with a smile that felt painted on. But now, alone in her small apartment above the patisserie, she sat cross-legged on her bed, the silver locket open in her trembling hands. The tiny photograph inside was worn around the edges. A young couple at a carnival, their faces pressed close together, joy radiating from their expressions. Her mother looked so young, carefree in a way Emma had rarely seen her. And the man. She had spent countless hours studying his face in this photo, creating stories about who he might be, what he might be doing now. Never had she imagined he would walk into her shop, successful and composed, wearing a suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Her phone buzzed again, the 5th call from her mother in the last hour. Emma had texted her briefly after the encounter. He was here. Marcus. He saw the necklace. That was all it took to send her usually calm mother into a panic. But Emma needed time to process this on her own before facing the avalanche of explanations that were surely coming. The business card lay on her bedside table, its elegant typography catching the light. Marcus Bennett, CEO, Foster & Associates. She picked it up, running her finger over the embossed letters. A quick internet search had filled in the blanks. Successful real estate developer, philanthropist, featured in Boston Business Monthly's 40 Under 40 years ago. The kind of man who transformed skylines and closed million-dollar deals over lunch. The sharp contrast between this polished executive and the young man in the locket's photo made her head spin. In her mother's stories, carefully doled out over the years, he had been a dreamer with big plans and a scholarship to Boston University. He was meant for bigger things, her mother would say, a hint of pride mixing with old pain in her voice. I couldn't hold him back. Emma's phone buzzed again, and this time she answered. "Mom, I'm okay. Baby, I'm so sorry." Sarah's voice cracked slightly. "I should have been there. I should have prepared you for this possibility." "How could you have prepared me?" Emma moved to her small kitchen, needing to keep her hands busy. She pulled out flour, sugar, butter, the ingredients that had always brought her comfort. "Hey, Mom, why didn't you tell him?" "About me?" The silence on the other end stretched so long that Emma thought the call had dropped. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice thick with emotion. "I found out 2 weeks after he left. He was so excited about the internship, about starting his career. I convinced myself I was doing the right thing by not telling him, that I'd be ruining his chances at success if I did." Emma cracked eggs into a bowl with more force than necessary, watching the yolks break and run together. "And later, when I was older, when I asked about him, by then he was already becoming successful. I saw his name in business magazines, read about his achievements. It felt too late, too complicated. I told myself you were better off without the disruption." Sarah paused. "I know now that wasn't my choice to make." The familiar motions of baking helped steady Emma's hands as she worked the ingredients together. She had learned to bake in this same way, standing beside her mother in their small kitchen, creating something beautiful out of raw ingredients and patience. It was their shared language, the way they worked through problems and celebrated joys. "He wants to talk, Mum. He left his card." "What do you want to do?" Emma stared at the dough taking shape under her hands. "I don't know. Part of me wants to throw his card away and pretend this never happened." But she thought of the look in Marcus's eyes when he saw the necklace, the way his composed facade had cracked to reveal something raw and genuine. "I have questions. So many questions." "Of course you do, sweetheart." Sarah's voice softened. "And you deserve answers. From both of us." The oven beeped as it reached temperature, its warm glow filling the small kitchen. Emma had always found it ironic that she'd chosen a career that required her to create perfect things out of chaos, taking separate, sometimes opposing ingredients and transforming them into something harmonious. Now her life felt like those raw ingredients, thrown together unexpectedly, waiting to be shaped into something new. "He's different than I imagined," Emma admitted, sliding a tray of cookies into the oven. "All these years, I had this picture in my head of someone who didn't care enough to stay, who chose ambition over family. But today, when he saw the necklace," she touched the locket again, feeling its familiar weight. "He looked like someone who had lost something precious and just found it again." "Marcus was always more complex than I probably let you believe," Sarah said quietly. I think I oversimplified our story to make it easier. For both of us." Emma set the timer and leaned against her counter, surrounded by the comforting scent of vanilla and warming butter. "I'm still angry," she said finally. "Not just at him, at the whole situation, at the fact that I've spent 21 years without a father when he was just a few hours away. You have every right to be angry, baby. At both of us." Outside Emma's window, the Boston skyline glittered in the growing dusk. Somewhere out there, in one of those gleaming towers, Marcus Bennett was probably grappling with his own version of this upheaval. The business card seemed to burn with possibility from its place on her counter. "I think," Emma said slowly, "I think I need to know more. About him. About what happened. About everything." She took a deep breath, the kind she used before attempting a particularly challenging pastry design. "But I need to do this my way, at my pace." "Whatever you decide, I'm here," Sarah promised. "And Emma, I know this changes everything, but it doesn't change how much I love you, how proud I am of you." The timer chimed and Emma pulled out a perfect batch of cookies, golden brown and filling her apartment with warmth. She had always believed that baking was about transformation, about taking separate elements and creating something new, something better. Maybe, she thought as she looked at Marcus's card again, that's what this unexpected reunion could be too. A chance to take the scattered pieces of her family history and create something whole. Marcus sat in his home office, surrounded by the trappings of success that suddenly felt hollow. The wall of awards and achievements that had once filled him with pride now seemed to mock him. Each plaque and trophy a reminder of time lost with his daughter. His laptop screen glowed with open tabs, Emma's social media profiles, articles about young pastry chefs in Boston, anything he could find to piece together the life he had missed. The images told a story he should have been part of. Emma's high school graduation, her culinary school achievements, ribbon cuttings at various bakeries where she had apprenticed. In each photo, she stood proud, often with Sarah beside her, both of them beaming at the camera. Sarah looked different from his memories, her once dark hair now elegantly streaked with silver, laugh lines around her eyes. But her smile was exactly as he remembered. His phone buzzed with another message from his assistant about the Cambridge property, but Marcus couldn't focus on real estate developments now. He found himself drawn to a video of Emma demonstrating advanced pastry techniques at a culinary arts showcase. Her hands moved with confident precision as she crafted delicate sugar sculptures, her voice clear and passionate as she explained each step. She had inherited Sarah's graceful movements and his own focused determination. 21 years, he whispered to the empty room. The number felt impossible. He could still vividly remember his last morning with Sarah, the way she had hugged him tightly at the bus station, promising to write. He had written too for months, but their letters had grown shorter, less frequent, until they stopped altogether. Had she already known then? Had she been carrying their child while waving goodbye? A soft knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in, Rosa," he called out, recognizing his housekeeper's familiar pattern. Rosa entered with a cup of coffee, then paused, noting the unusual disorder in his typically immaculate office. Papers were scattered across his desk, and his tie hung loosely around his neck. "Is everything all right, Mr. Bennett? You've been in here since yesterday evening." Marcus looked up at Rosa, who had worked for him for 15 years. She had been there through his rise to success, through failed relationships, through every milestone of his adult life. If anyone would understand the weight of this revelation, it would be her. "I have a daughter, Rosa," he said, the words still feeling strange on his tongue. "I just found out yesterday. She's 21 years old, and I didn't know she existed until I saw her wearing a necklace I gave her mother more than 2 decades ago." Rosa set down the coffee cup and sank into one of the leather chairs facing his desk. "Dios mío," she breathed. "Tell me everything." As Marcus recounted the previous day's events, Rosa listened intently, her experienced eyes taking in every detail of his emotional state. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "What are you going to do?" she finally asked. Marcus ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "I don't know. I left my card, but she hasn't called. I can't blame her. I'm a stranger to her. A stranger who should have been there." He stood up, pacing the length of his office. "I keep thinking about all the moments I missed. First steps, first words, first day of school. Who taught her to ride a bike? Who checked under her bed for monsters? You can't change the past," Rosa said gently, "but you can be present now." "If she'll let me," Marcus replied, stopping at the window. The morning sun was painting the city gold, reminding him of Emma's perfectly baked pastries. "I need to understand why Sarah never told me. We were in love. At least I thought we were. Did she think I wouldn't want to be involved?" "Perhaps," Rosa suggested. "You should focus less on why it happened and more on what you can do now. You're good at fixing things, Mr. Bennett. You take old buildings and make them new again. Maybe this isn't so different." Marcus turned from the window, struck by the parallel. "But buildings are simple, Rosa. You can plan every detail, control every variable. This is different." "Yes," Rosa agreed, standing to straighten his tie with maternal efficiency. "This is about hearts, not buildings. And hearts need patience, not control." Marcus's phone buzzed again, this time with an unknown number. His heart jumped, but it was just another business contact. He had been carrying his phone everywhere, sleeping with it beside his bed, waiting for Emma to call. "I should have stayed that day," he mused. "When I got that internship offer, I should have found a way to make it work with Sarah. Long distance, weekend visits, something. I was so focused on becoming successful, on proving myself. And now you are successful," Rosa pointed out. "Maybe that's exactly what needed to happen. You're in a position to help your daughter now, to support her dreams." Marcus looked again at the video paused on his laptop screen, at Emma's confident smile as she worked. "She's already amazing," he said softly. "She did that without my help, without my money, without me." "But she might need her father for what comes next," Rosa suggested. "Not your money or your success, just you." The intercom buzzed, and his assistant's voice filled the room. "Mr. Bennett, the board is waiting for the Cambridge property presentation." Marcus straightened his shoulders, gathering himself. "Tell them I'll be there in 10 minutes, Sarah." He turned to Rosa. "I have to go be CEO now." "And later?" Rosa asked, gathering the coffee cup. "Later, I'll be here, waiting, ready." He picked up his phone, making sure the volume was turned up. "When she's ready to talk, I want to be ready to listen." Rosa patted his shoulder as she passed. "The hardest part of being a parent," she said wisely, "is learning to wait for your children to come to you, even if you've just found out you are one." As Marcus gathered his materials for the board meeting, he kept glancing at the photograph of Emma from the culinary showcase. In it, she was placing the final touches on an elaborate wedding cake, her face a study in concentration. He had seen that same expression in the mirror countless times, working late into the night on complex development plans. "I may have missed your past," he whispered to the photograph. but I won't miss your future. Early morning light filtered through the windows of Sweet Dreams Patisserie as Emma prepared for another day. The rhythm of preparation had always been her sanctuary, mixing batters, rolling dough, timing each bake to perfection. But today, every motion felt charged with anticipation. She had spent 3 days turning Marcus's business card over in her hands, 3 days of practicing what she might say, 3 days of imagining every possible scenario. The decision to text him had come at 2 a.m., during her usual late-night baking session when the shop was quiet and her thoughts were clearest. The message had been simple. This is Emma. If you want to talk, I'm at the shop early every morning, before opening hours. 6 a.m. Now, at 5:55 a.m., she was intensely aware of every sound outside the shop's front door. Her hands moved automatically through the familiar motions of croissant preparation, laminating butter into dough with practiced precision. The repetitive folding and rolling helped steady her nerves, just as it had through every major moment of her life. At exactly 6 a.m., she heard footsteps outside. Through the glass, she could see Marcus's silhouette, more casual than their first encounter in jeans and a sweater rather than a business suit. He hesitated at the door, and Emma found herself holding her breath. Finally, she walked over and turned the lock. "You can come in," she said, stepping back to maintain a comfortable distance. "I have to keep working while we talk. These need to be ready for opening." Marcus entered, taking in the sight of the kitchen in full pre-opening preparation. Sheets of pastries in various stages lined the counters, and the air was rich with the scent of vanilla and warming butter. "Thank you," he said softly, "for being willing to meet." Emma returned to her workstation, focusing on the familiar pattern of fold, turn, roll. "I have questions," she stated, not looking up from her task. "And I think you probably do too." "More than I can count," Marcus admitted, carefully settling onto a stool at the prep counter. He watched her hands work the dough with methodical expertise. "You're very good at this." "I've had a lot of practice. Mom taught me the basics when I was little. It became our thing." Emma paused, then added, "She taught me everything I needed to know." The implied accusation hung in the air between them. Marcus absorbed it without defense. "Your mother is an amazing woman, and she clearly did an incredible job raising you." Emma looked up then, meeting his eyes directly for the first time. "Why didn't you try to find her after you left? She said you wrote for a while, but then just stopped." Marcus's hands tightened on the edge of the counter. The letters became harder. We were both moving in different directions. I was working 16-hour days at the firm, trying to prove myself. The gaps between letters got longer, and eventually, he shook his head. "It's not an excuse. It's not. I should have tried harder." "Would it have made a difference?" Emma began cutting the laminated dough into precise triangles. "If you had stayed in touch, if she had told you about me then?" "Yes," Marcus answered without hesitation. "I would have come back immediately. Everything else would have waited." "But you didn't come back. You became successful instead." Emma's movements became slightly more forceful as she shaped the croissants. "I saw your website, Foster & Associates, major real estate developments, charity galas. You got everything you wanted." "Not everything." Marcus watched a perfectly formed croissant take shape under her fingers. "Success feels very different when you realize what it cost you." Emma placed the shaped croissants on a baking sheet, each one mathematically precise. "I used to imagine what you were like. Every Father's Day, every school event, every time Mom had to work double shifts to make ends meet. I created this whole story about who you might be." She slid the tray into the oven and set the timer. "The reality is stranger than anything I imagined." "What did you imagine?" "Sometimes I thought you were a struggling artist in Paris, or a professor in some small college town. Once I convinced myself you were a secret agent." A small smile flickered across her face. "I never pictured a CEO in a corner office." Marcus returned her smile cautiously. "To be fair, I never pictured having a daughter who could create art out of butter and flour." "Did you always want to be a pastry chef?" "No." Emma moved to check other items in various stages of preparation. "First, I wanted to be a hotel manager. I used to help out at the small inn where Mom worked when I was growing up. I loved the idea of creating spaces where people could feel at home away from home. She gestured around the bakery. This was supposed to be a stepping stone, learning about food service. But I fell in love with it. Do you still think about the hotel idea? Sometimes. Emma pulled out a tray of perfectly baked morning buns, their spiral pattern exactly uniform. But it takes more than dreams to open a hotel. Right now, I'm focused on what's practical. Marcus absorbed this information, watching her efficient movements around the kitchen. You know, I have some experience with property development. Stop. Emma's voice was firm. I'm not looking for your help or your money. I agreed to talk because I needed answers, not because I need anything else from you. Of course, Marcus said quickly. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to overstep. The timer chimed, and Emma moved to retrieve the croissants, their golden brown surface gleaming. The scent of butter and caramelized sugar filled the space between them. She arranged them carefully in the display case, each one placed with perfect precision. They're beautiful, Marcus observed. You're an artist. Mom always said baking is about patience, Emma replied. About understanding that good things take time. She checked the clock, 6:45 a.m. The shop opens at 7. I need to finish setting up. Marcus stood, recognizing the dismissal. Thank you for this morning, for being willing to talk at all. He paused at the door. Would it be all right if I came by again? Maybe tomorrow? Emma was quiet for a long moment, rearranging items in the display case. Finally, she looked up. Same time, she said. And tomorrow you can try one of these croissants. They'll be cool enough to eat by then. Marcus nodded, hope warming his chest. I'll be here. As he stepped out into the early morning air, he could still smell butter and sugar on his clothes. It was, he realized, the scent of a new beginning. One that, like Emma's pastries, would require patience, precision, and perfect timing to turn out right. For 2 weeks, the morning meetings had become a ritual. Marcus would arrive precisely at 6 a.m., and Emma would be there, creating her daily masterpieces. Their conversations had evolved from cautious exchanges to something more comfortable, punctuated by the rhythmic sounds of baking and the ever-present aroma of fresh pastries. This morning, Marcus noticed something different as he entered. Blueprints spread across the corner of the prep counter, partially covered with flour. Emma quickly rolled them up when she saw him, but not before he caught glimpses of room layouts and floor plans. Good morning, he said, settling into what had become his usual spot. A fresh croissant waited for him, still slightly warm. Those looked interesting. Emma continued piping delicate cream roses onto a wedding cake, her focus seemingly entirely on the task. Just some old plans. Dreams on paper. She paused, then added, Mom kept them. From when I was in high school. The hotel? Marcus ventured carefully, remembering their previous conversation about her original career aspirations. Emma stepped back, examining her work critically. There's this old Victorian mansion on the outskirts of town. It's been abandoned for years. I used to pass it on my way to school and imagine what it could become. She switched piping tips, creating delicate leaves around the roses. I even wrote a business plan for it in my senior year economics class. Got an A+. Marcus bit into his croissant, careful not to let his excitement show too obviously. Would you be willing to show me? The plans, I mean. Not for any reason other than curiosity. Emma's hands stilled for a moment. Then slowly, she set down her piping bag and retrieved the rolled blueprints. Promise you won't go into CEO mode? Scout's honor. Marcus raised his right hand, earning a small smile from Emma. She unrolled the plans, weighing down the corners with various baking implements. The blueprints were amateur but detailed, showing a clear vision despite their simplicity. Emma had transformed the old mansion into a boutique hotel, complete with a garden cafe and a dedicated pastry kitchen. I called it the Sweet Retreat, she explained, a hint of embarrassment coloring her voice. Probably too on the nose, but I was 17. Marcus studied the plans, genuinely impressed by the thought that had gone into them. You've considered everything. Flow between spaces, natural light, preserving original features while adding modern amenities. He pointed to a particular detail. This circular window in the dining room. Is that original to the building? Yes. Emma's eyes lit up despite herself. It's one of my favorite features. The colored glass catches the morning light perfectly. I used to sneak onto the property sometimes, just to watch the sunrise through it. Does the property still stand empty? Emma nodded, adding final touches to the wedding cake. Nobody wants to take on a restoration that big. It needs everything: new wiring, plumbing, structural work. She shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. Like I said, dreams on paper. Marcus watched her work, noting how her movements mirrored the precision of her architectural drawings. You know, dreams have a way of staying with us for a reason. Sometimes they need to stay dreams, Emma replied, but her voice lacked conviction. Besides, I have the bakery now. Charlotte is talking about retiring soon, and she's hinted at selling it to me. The bakery is beautiful, Marcus agreed, but it doesn't have to be an either-or situation. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. Sometimes the best dreams are the ones that combine everything we love. Emma looked up sharply. I thought you promised no CEO mode. This isn't CEO mode, Marcus assured her. This is dad mode, maybe? Is that allowed yet? The word dad hung in the air between them, neither completely comfortable nor entirely foreign anymore. Emma busied herself with cleaning her workstation, but Marcus could see her turning the idea over in her mind. I don't want your money, she said finally, echoing her statement from their first meeting. Or your business connections, or anything else that makes this complicated. What about my opinion? Marcus asked gently, as someone who's spent 20 years evaluating properties. Not as a CEO or an investor, just as someone who might understand the practical side of your dream. Emma wiped her hands on her apron, leaving slight traces of flour. I could maybe handle an opinion, she conceded, but only if you promise to be honest. No sugarcoating things just because, she gestured between them, of this. When have I ever sugarcoated anything? Marcus smiled, taking another bite of his croissant. That's clearly your department. The joke surprised a laugh out of Emma, their first shared moment of genuine mirth. It felt like a small breakthrough, a tiny crack in the wall between them. The mansion's address is 247 Maple Grove Road, she said suddenly. If you wanted to drive by sometime, just to look. Marcus recognized the olive branch for what it was. I'd like that. Maybe we could drive by together. When you're ready, Emma began preparing for the day's first batch of bread, measuring ingredients with practiced precision. Maybe, she said softly. Let me think about it. They fell into comfortable silence, the only sounds the measuring of ingredients and the occasional scribble as Marcus made notes about the blueprints, asking quiet questions now and then about specific details. The morning light grew stronger, painting the kitchen in warm golden tones that made Emma's design for a sun-filled dining room seem not just possible, but inevitable. As opening time approached, Marcus carefully rolled up the blueprints. Thank you, he said, for sharing these with me. For trusting me this much. Emma nodded, sliding the first batch of bread into the oven. Thank you for not turning it into a business proposition. She hesitated, then added, Same time tomorrow? Wouldn't miss it, Marcus replied, placing the blueprints carefully on her shelf. As he turned to leave, he noticed a small smile playing at the corners of Emma's mouth, the same smile he remembered seeing on Sarah's face whenever she was planning something special. The bell chimed as he left, and Emma returned to her morning routine. But her eyes kept drifting to the rolled blueprints, and for the first time in years, the old Victorian mansion on Maple Grove Road didn't feel like just a dream on paper anymore. The autumn afternoon painted long shadows across the overgrown lawn of the Victorian mansion as Emma's small car pulled up to the rusted gates. She had driven past this place hundreds of times, but sitting here now, with Marcus in the passenger seat, made it feel different. More real, more possible, more... It's beautiful, Marcus said softly, taking in the elaborate woodwork of the wraparound porch, the towering turret that crowned the right wing, the delicate stained glass windows that somehow remained intact despite years of neglect. Even in this condition, you can see the bones are solid. Emma killed the engine but didn't move to get out. Her hands remained on the steering wheel, knuckles slightly white. I used to imagine what it looked like in its prime. All those windows lit up at night, parties spilling onto the veranda, music drifting across the gardens. It could be that way again, Marcus observed, careful to keep his tone neutral, remembering his promise not to push. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. I hope you don't mind, but I did some preliminary research. The property has been in probate for years. The last owner passed away without a clear heir, and none of the distant relatives wanted to take on the restoration costs. Emma finally turned to look at him. How did you find that out? I may have made a few calls to the county records office, Marcus admitted. Strictly fact-finding. No business discussions, I promise. To his relief, Emma smiled. I tried to get that information once, but they wouldn't tell me anything. Guess a CEO has more pull than a teenage pastry chef. Would you like to look inside? I got permission from the estate manager. Marcus held up a key. Only if you're ready, of course. Emma's eyes widened. How did you… Never mind. I probably don't want to know. She took a deep breath. Yes, I want to see inside. I've only ever glimpsed it through windows. They made their way up the weed-choked path to the front door. The key stuck slightly in the lock, protesting years of disuse, but finally turned. The door opened with a creak that echoed through the empty foyer, stirring up dust motes that danced in the late afternoon light streaming through the dirty windows. Emma stepped in first, her footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. Despite the decay, the grand staircase still curved elegantly upward, its mahogany banister dulled but intact. She moved with purpose, as if following a map she'd drawn in her mind years ago. The dining room is through here, she said, leading the way. The one with the circular window. They entered a large room, and Marcus heard Emma's sharp intake of breath. The colored glass window she had described cast rainbow patterns across the floor, turning the dust in the air into sparkling prisms. Even through years of grime, the effect was magical. In my plans, Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper, I designed the breakfast service to coincide with sunrise. Imagine guests having their morning coffee here, watching the colors change as the sun rises. Marcus could see it clearly. Tables draped in white linen, the smell of fresh pastries, Emma's creations displayed on elegant tiered stands. Tell me more, he encouraged. What else did you envision? For the next hour, they moved through the house together, Emma pointing out where each element of her plan would go. The library would become a cozy bar, the conservatory a tea room. The kitchen needed complete modernization, but was spacious enough for both hotel service and a dedicated pastry station. The upper floors would be guest rooms, of course, Emma explained as they climbed the stairs. 12 in total, each unique. I wanted to keep it intimate, exclusive. Not a chain hotel experience. Marcus noted how the building's layout matched almost perfectly with the blueprints he'd studied. You really did think of everything. They reached the turret room, circular with windows on all sides offering views of the surrounding countryside. Emma walked to one of the windows, wiping away years of dust with her sleeve. This would be the premium suite. I called it the Sunset Suite in my plans, because the view of the sunset from here is incredible. Is that why you're here now? Marcus asked, noting the late afternoon light. To see the sunset? Emma nodded. I wanted you to see it too, to understand why this place is special. They stood in silence as the sun began to sink, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks that filtered through the windows, transforming the empty room into something magical. Marcus watched Emma's face as she took it all in, seeing the same expression she wore when creating her most intricate pastries. Pure, focused passion. The property record showed an asking price, he said carefully. It's high, but not impossible, especially considering the location and historical value. Emma turned to face him. I told you, I don't want your money. I know, Marcus held up his hands. But what about your money? And maybe a bank loan. The property has good bones, like I said. With the right business plan, a bank might be interested. My money wouldn't even cover the down payment, Emma said. But he could hear her starting to calculate in her head. What about a partnership? Marcus suggested. Not with me, unless you want that someday. But maybe with Charlotte. You mentioned she's thinking of selling the bakery to you. What if instead you became partners? The hotel could feature an upscale version of Sweet Dreams Patisserie. Emma was quiet for a long moment, watching the last rays of sun paint the room in gold. I'd need to learn so much. About hotels, about restoration, about running a bigger business. Those are all learnable things, Marcus said softly. The vision, the passion, those are the hard parts. And you already have those. Emma turned back to the window, but not before Marcus caught the glimmer of tears in her eyes. Why are you doing this? Because I missed watching you learn to walk, to talk, to ride a bike, Marcus replied honestly. I missed your first day of school and your graduation. I can't get those moments back. But maybe I can be here for this one, watching you build your dream step by step. The sun finally dipped below the horizon, leaving the room in soft twilight. Emma wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I'm not saying yes, she said finally. But I'm not saying no either. I just need time to think. Time is something I can give, Marcus replied. I'm not going anywhere this time. They made their way back downstairs in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. As they reached Emma's car, she paused. Same time tomorrow morning? At the bakery? Of course, Marcus smiled. I need my daily croissant fix now. As they drove away, the old mansion stood silhouetted against the darkening sky, its windows catching the last light like promises waiting to be kept. Sarah James stood in the doorway of Sweet Dreams Patisserie, watching her daughter work alongside Charlotte, the elderly owner. It was strange being here outside of her usual Sunday morning visits, but Emma's cryptic phone call had brought her rushing across town during her lunch break. 23 years of single motherhood had taught her to read the subtle nuances in her daughter's voice, and this call had been different. Mom, Emma looked up from the display case she was arranging. You didn't have to come right away. When my daughter calls and says we need to talk, I make time, Sarah replied, noting the blueprints rolled up on the counter, the same ones she'd kept safely stored all these years. Besides, I had a feeling this was coming. Charlotte, ever perceptive, wiped her hands on her apron. I'll go check on those special orders in the back, she said, disappearing through the kitchen doors. Emma waited until they were alone before speaking. Marcus took me to see the Victorian mansion yesterday. Sarah's hands tightened on her purse strap. Did he? She tried to keep her voice neutral, though her heart was racing. And how was that? He got permission from the estate manager. We went inside. Emma's eyes took on the dreamy quality they always had when talking about the old house. It's exactly like I imagined, Mom. Even better. And Marcus, he did research. He found out about the property status, the asking price. He thinks it could work. Emma, honey, Sarah started, but Emma held up a flour-dusted hand. I know what you're going to say, that it's too expensive, too risky, that I should focus on taking over the bakery from Charlotte. She gestured to the blueprints. But remember when you first saw these plans? You said dreams were worth holding on to, even if they seemed impossible. Sarah moved to the counter, running her fingers along the edge of the blueprints. I remember. I also remember spending years protecting you from disappointment. Is that why you never told Marcus about me? The question hung in the air between them. To protect me from disappointment? Sarah sank onto one of the cafe chairs, suddenly feeling the weight of all her past decisions. I thought I was protecting both of you. He was so determined to succeed, and I didn't want to be the one who held him back, who made him choose between his dreams and his responsibility. But you didn't give him the choice, Emma said softly, coming to sit across from her mother. You made it for him. I did. Sarah reached across the table, taking her daughter's hand. And for years, I convinced myself it was the right decision. Watching you grow up, becoming this amazing person, I told myself we didn't need anything else. Then he walked into your shop wearing that perfectly tailored suit, probably worth more than I made in a month back then, and all my old justifications started to sound hollow. He's different than I expected, Emma admitted. He's not trying to buy his way into my life. When we were at the mansion, he talked about bank loans and business plans. Real possibilities, not just throwing money at it. Sarah felt tears pricking at her eyes. You know what terrifies me? That he might be exactly what I always knew he could be. Someone wonderful. And that makes what I did even harder to justify. Mom, Emma squeezed her hand. I'm not choosing him over you. You're my mom. You're the one who was there for everything. That's never going to change. But things are changing, Sarah replied. I see it in your face when you talk about the mansion, about his suggestions. You're starting to trust him. I'm trying to, Emma said. Just like I'm trying to understand why you kept us apart. Both things can be true at the same time. That what you did hurt us, and that you did it out of love. The bell above the door chimed, and they both looked up to see Marcus standing there, looking uncertain. I'm sorry, he said quickly. I can come back later. No. Sarah stood up, wiping her eyes. Stay. We probably should talk, all three of us. Marcus approached cautiously, like someone approaching a wild animal they didn't want to startle. Sarah, he said softly, you look wonderful. Sarah let out a watery laugh. Liar. I've been crying and my mascara is probably everywhere. Still beautiful, Marcus insisted. And for a moment Emma could see what they must have been like together, young and in love, before life got complicated. I hear you've been looking at real estate with our daughter, Sarah said, trying to inject some normalcy into the situation. Your daughter, Marcus corrected gently. You did all the hard work. I'm just hoping to help with what comes next, if she'll let me. Emma looked between her parents, her mother, who had given up everything to raise her, and her father, who was trying so hard to make up for lost time. Maybe, she said carefully. We all need to help with what comes next. Sarah turned to her daughter. What are you saying? I'm saying that maybe the hotel doesn't have to be just my dream anymore. Maybe it can be something we all build together. Emma unrolled the blueprints on the table. Mom, you have years of experience in hotel management, and Marcus knows about property development. And I know what I want it to become. Marcus and Sarah exchanged a look over their daughter's head. A look filled with 2 decades of unspoken words, regrets, and possibilities. We have a lot to work through, Sarah said finally. We do, Marcus agreed. But maybe Emma's right. Maybe we start with something concrete, something we can all believe in. Emma watched her parents, hardly daring to breathe. In the kitchen, she could hear Charlotte humming as she worked, the familiar sounds of baking providing a soundtrack to this moment of possibility. The sunset from the turret room, she said suddenly. You both need to see it. Together. Then you'll understand why this is important. Sarah reached out, taking one of Emma's hands, then cautiously extending her other hand toward Marcus. After a moment's hesitation, he took it, completing the circle. Okay, Sarah whispered. Show us the sunset. The small conference room at Foster & Associates felt worlds away from the cozy warmth of Sweet Dreams Patisserie. Emma sat between her parents at the sleek glass table, her father's suit jacket draped over the back of his chair, her mother's reading glasses perched on her nose as they reviewed the preliminary renovation plans. 3 cups of coffee sat cooling on the table, accompanied by a box of Emma's fresh pastries, her contribution to their first official project meeting. The structural engineer's report came back better than expected, Marcus explained, spreading out the detailed assessment. The foundation is solid, and most of the issues are cosmetic rather than structural. The biggest challenges will be updating the electrical system and plumbing to meet modern codes. Sarah tapped her pen against the paper. What about the historical preservation requirements? The mansion's over a century old. There must be regulations we need to follow. Already looked into that. Marcus nodded, pulling out another document. The property is registered as a historical building, which actually works in our favor. We can apply for preservation grants to help with the restoration costs. The catch is, we'll need to maintain certain original features. Like the stained glass windows? Emma asked, thinking of the circular window in the dining room. Exactly. But that aligns perfectly with your vision anyway. Marcus smiled at his daughter. The Preservation Board was particularly interested in your plan to maintain the original character while adapting the space for modern use. Sarah looked up sharply. You've already spoken to the Preservation Board? Just preliminarily, Marcus assured her. I wanted to know what we were dealing with before presenting any formal plans. Emma's initial designs actually impressed them. Emma felt her cheeks warm at the praise. They were just sketches. They were a vision, Marcus corrected. And speaking of vision, Charlotte sent over the projected numbers from Sweet Dreams. The catering side of the business has grown significantly since you took over that department. Sarah reached for her coffee, her expression thoughtful. The hotel would need a much larger kitchen operation than the current bakery. I've been thinking about that, Emma said, pulling out her own notebook. The pages were dusted with flour, but the calculations were clear. We could phase it in gradually. Start with the bakery and cafe portion while the rooms are being renovated. Build up our reputation and client base before the full hotel launch. Marcus leaned back in his chair, watching their daughter outline her business strategy with a mixture of pride and amazement. Sarah must have noticed his expression because she smiled softly. She gets that methodical planning from you, she said quietly. I used to watch her organize her toy kitchen when she was little, everything in its precise place. Just like you used to arrange your textbooks. But she gets her creativity from you, Marcus replied. The way you used to rearrange our entire apartment on a whim, seeing possibilities no one else could see. Emma looked between them, still amazed at these glimpses of their shared past. Maybe I get the good parts from both of you. The moment was interrupted by Marcus's assistant knocking on the conference room door. Mr. Bennett? The zoning commission called. They can meet with us next Tuesday about the permit applications. Thank you, Sarah, Marcus replied. Please tell them we'll be there. He turned back to Emma and Sarah. If you're both free? Emma nodded immediately, but Sarah hesitated. I'll need to request time off from the inn. Mom, you don't have to keep working there if... Emma started, but Sarah shook her head. One step at a time, honey. Let's see if we can make this work first. She gathered her papers, her movements precise and controlled. I should get back. My lunch break ended 20 minutes ago. Marcus stood. I can drive you. We can discuss the timeline for the permit applications on the way. I have my car, Sarah replied automatically, then paused. But maybe we could get coffee sometime this week to talk about the project and other things. I'd like that, Marcus said softly. Emma watched this careful dance between her parents, the way they were relearning how to exist in each other's orbit. I should get back to the bakery too, she said, gathering her things. Charlotte's teaching me her secret recipe for Danish pastry today. Before you go, Marcus reached into his briefcase and pulled out 3 keys on simple silver rings. The estate manager dropped these off this morning, one for each of us. For site visits. Emma took her key, feeling its weight in her palm. More than just metal and teeth, it felt like a tangible piece of her dream becoming reality. Sarah accepted hers with slightly trembling fingers, and Marcus kept the third. Our first real investment in this project, he said. Together. As they rode the elevator down to the lobby, Emma noticed how her parents stood, not too close, but not as far apart as they had that first day in the bakery. Progress, like her favorite recipes, was all about small, careful measurements. Oh, Sarah said suddenly, I found some old photos of the mansion from its heyday, from the Historical Society archives. I thought they might help with the restoration plans. Bring them to coffee, Marcus suggested. Maybe Thursday? That little place on Maple Street. The one with the terrible scones? Sarah smiled. 2 o'clock. I'll bring better scones, Emma offered. Since apparently I'm catering all our meetings now. They parted ways in the lobby, Sarah to her practical sedan, Marcus back to his office, and Emma to her flour-dusted world of sugar and butter. But something had shifted, settled into place like ingredients coming together in perfect proportion. Later that afternoon, as Emma worked on Charlotte's secret Danish recipe, she found herself humming. The key to the mansion hung on a hook near her workspace, catching the light occasionally, winking like a promise. You seem happy, Charlotte observed, showing her how to fold the delicate layers of dough. I am, Emma realized. Scared too, but mostly happy. Good things often start that way, Charlotte said wisely. Like this dough. If you're not a little nervous working with it, you're probably doing it wrong. Emma laughed, carefully following Charlotte's example with the pastry. Is that your secret ingredient? A dash of fear mixed with hope? That, Charlotte winked. And extra butter. Always extra butter. The Victorian mansion's grand foyer echoed with heated voices, dust motes swirling in the streams of morning light that filtered through the windows. What had started as a routine site meeting with the contractors had quickly evolved into something more contentious. The preservation board won't approve those modifications, Marcus argued, pointing to the latest architectural plans spread across a makeshift table of sawhorses and plywood. "We need to find another way to route the new heating system. And I'm telling you," the contractor countered, "there's no other way to meet modern safety codes without running those ducts through the original walls. Unless you want to spend an extra $250,000 on a custom system." Emma stood at the base of the grand staircase, watching the debate unfold. The past month had brought a steady stream of similar challenges, each solution seeming to spawn two new problems. The renovation costs were already creeping above their initial estimates, and they hadn't even started the major work yet. Sarah arrived through the front door, carrying a tray of coffee cups from Sweet Dreams. "I thought we could all use this," she announced, her practical nature cutting through the tension. "Now, what exactly is the problem?" As the contractor explained the heating system dilemma, Emma noticed how her mother listened intently, asking questions that somehow made both Marcus and the contractor consider new angles. It was a skill she'd developed over years of hotel management, finding compromises where others saw only obstacles. "What if," Sarah suggested, studying the plans, "we ran the main ducts through the service corridors? The mansion was built with separate passages for the staff. They're not historically significant, and they already connect all the floors." The contractor frowned, considering. "It would require some creative routing, but it might work. Would save us having to cut into those original walls." Marcus looked at Sarah with admiration. "That's brilliant. How did you know about the service corridor?" "I've been reading the original blueprints from the Historical Society," Sarah admitted. "I wanted to understand how the house worked in its prime, how the staff managed it. I thought it might help with our operational planning." Emma felt a familiar warmth in her chest, watching her parents work together. These moments had become more frequent, little glimpses of what might have been, what could still be. "The real challenge," the contractor continued, gathering his plans, "is going to be the timeline. With these modifications, we're looking at delays, and delays mean money." After he left, the three of them stood in the dusty foyer, the magnitude of their undertaking hanging heavy in the air. Emma broke the silence first. "Maybe we should scale back some of the plans," she suggested reluctantly. "Start smaller, maybe just the restaurant and a few rooms." "No," Marcus and Sarah said simultaneously, then looked at each other in surprise. "This is your dream, honey," Sarah continued. "We're not compromising on it. But the costs," Emma protested, "are manageable," Marcus finished. "We'll figure it out. That's what families do." The word family still felt new, delicate, like a soufflé that might collapse if handled too roughly. But it was getting stronger, more real with each passing day. "Speaking of family," Sarah said carefully, "have you told your board about your personal investment in this project?" Marcus's silence was answer enough. "Dad?" Emma's use of the word still felt strange on her tongue, but it was becoming more natural. "Won't they need to know?" Marcus ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Emma had come to recognize as a sign of inner conflict. "The board, they're very traditional in their approach to investments. They prefer clean, straightforward deals, no personal complications. And we're definitely a complication," Emma concluded. "You're not a complication," Marcus corrected firmly. "You're my daughter, and this project, it's not just business for me. I need them to understand that." Sarah touched his arm gently, a gesture that would have been unthinkable a month ago. "When are you going to tell them?" "There's a board meeting next week." Marcus sighed. "I'll tell them then. But I want you both there with me." "What?" Emma's eyes widened. "In front of the whole board?" "Yes. If they're going to understand why this project is different, they need to meet the remarkable women behind it." He smiled at them both. "Besides, I thought maybe we could bring some of those maple pecan Danish you made yesterday. Might sweeten the mood." "Bribery by pastry?" Sarah laughed. "Now that's a strategy I can support." Emma looked around the dusty foyer, seeing past the renovation challenges to the dream beneath. "Do you really think we can do this?" "All of it. The hotel, the restaurant, the family part?" "I think," Sarah said thoughtfully, "that we've already done the hardest part. We found each other again. Everything else is just project management." Marcus chuckled. "Spoken like a true hotel manager." He checked his watch. I have a meeting back at the office, but dinner tonight, all three of us? We should practice our presentation for the board. I'll bring dessert, Emma offered. Something special. Maybe that chocolate souffle I've been perfecting. The one that keeps collapsing? Sarah teased. Hey, I've almost got it right. And anyway, Emma smiled, isn't that what we're all doing? Trying, failing, trying again until we get it right. As they locked up the mansion, each with their own key, Emma noticed how naturally they moved together now. Her father holding the door, her mother checking the windows, herself making sure the contractor's plans were safely stored. Like a dance, they were slowly learning together. Oh, Marcus called as they headed to their cars. One more thing. I had an idea about the circular window in the dining room. What if we commissioned a custom stained glass piece to replace the broken panels? Something that tells a story. What kind of story? Emma asked. Marcus looked at Sarah, then back at Emma. Maybe something about things that break apart and come back together, more beautiful for having been repaired. Sarah's eyes glistened slightly. Like a family? Like a family, Marcus agreed softly. Emma hugged her parents goodbye, breathing in her mother's familiar perfume and her father's newer but equally comforting presence. Above them, the old mansion stood proud against the autumn sky, its windows reflecting the promise of tomorrow. The boardroom of Foster & Associates felt impossibly quiet as Emma arranged her pastries on the elegant silver tray she'd borrowed from Charlotte. Her hands, usually so steady when piping delicate decorations or handling fragile sugarwork, trembled slightly as she adjusted each perfectly crafted piece. The maple pecan Danish are still warm, she whispered to her father, who stood nearby adjusting his tie for the third time. Marcus Bennett, usually the picture of corporate confidence, looked almost as nervous as she felt. Sarah sat reviewing their presentation slides one last time, her reading glasses perched on her nose. She'd taken the morning off from the inn, dressed in a borrowed suit that made her look both professional and somehow vulnerable. Remember, she murmured, we're not just presenting a business plan, we're sharing a vision. The board members began filing in, 12 men and women in expensive suits, carrying tablets and leather portfolios, their faces carefully neutral as they noticed Emma and Sarah. Emma recognized some of them from photos in her father's office. Harrison Wells, the sharp-eyed CFO, Patricia Chen, head of legal, Thomas Montgomery, whose family had helped found the firm 3 generations ago. Marcus, Montgomery nodded, taking his seat at the head of the table. I understand you have a personal presentation for us today? Marcus straightened, unconsciously positioning himself between the board and his family. Yes, Thomas. But first, please, help yourself to some refreshments. They're from Sweet Dreams Patisserie, which is relevant to our presentation. The board members eyed the pastries with mixed curiosity and appreciation. Patricia Chen took a bite of a Danish, and her eyebrows rose in surprise. These are exceptional. Thank you, Emma said, finding her voice. They're my creations. And you are? Harrison Wells asked, reaching for a second pastry despite himself. Marcus took a deep breath. Members of the board, I'd like to introduce you to Emma Bennett, my daughter, and Sarah James, her mother. He paused, letting the surprise ripple through the room. And I'm here today to present not just a business opportunity, but a chance to be part of something truly special. For the next hour, they laid out their vision. Marcus handled the financial projections and market analysis. Sarah spoke about operational logistics and hotel management, and Emma presented the creative direction and culinary program. They showed renderings of the restored mansion, projected revenue streams, and marketing strategies. The numbers are solid, Harrison noted, studying the financials. But Marcus, you've never brought us a project with such personal involvement before. That's true, Marcus acknowledged, because I've never had a project that meant this much before. He looked at Emma and Sarah. 3 months ago, I didn't know I had a daughter. I didn't know that the woman I loved 23 years ago had built an amazing life without me. But now that I do know, now that I have a chance to be part of something that matters more than just profit margins. This is a business, Marcus, Montgomery interrupted. Not a family therapy session. With all due respect, Thomas, Sarah spoke up, her voice steady. It's both. Yes, this is a sound business investment. The numbers prove that. But it's also a chance for this firm to be part of something unique. How many corporate hotel properties can say their executive chef is the owner's daughter? How many can offer pastries that people line up for every morning at Sweet Dreams? Emma stepped forward, her professional training taking over. I'd like to share something, if I may. She opened her tablet and pulled up photos of her latest creation, an elaborate wedding cake she'd designed specifically for this presentation. Its tiers resembled the mansion's architecture, with delicate sugarwork replicating the historic details in miniature. This is what I can do with sugar and flour, she explained. Imagine what we could create in a fully restored Victorian mansion, with a professional kitchen and a team of talented staff. We're not just proposing another hotel. We're offering an experience that can't be replicated anywhere else. Patricia Chen studied the cake photos with interest. The attention to detail is remarkable. And you did this yourself? Every element, Emma confirmed, just like I've created every pastry you're enjoying right now. The personal touch is actually a strong selling point, Harrison mused. In today's market, authenticity and unique experiences are what luxury travelers are seeking. Montgomery leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. Marcus, could I speak with you privately for a moment? Emma's heart sank as her father followed Montgomery into his adjacent office. Sarah reached for her hand under the table, squeezing it gently. The minutes crawled by as the remaining board members continued to study their proposal, occasionally murmuring to each other. Emma found herself studying the pattern of the wooden conference table, tracing its grain with her eyes, trying not to count the seconds. When Marcus and Montgomery returned, Emma couldn't read their expressions. Ms. Bennett, Montgomery addressed her directly. Your father has made a compelling argument for your vision. But I have one question. Why this mansion? Why not a newer property that wouldn't require such extensive renovation? Emma met his gaze steadily. Because some things are worth saving, Mr. Montgomery, worth restoring. Whether they're historic buildings or... She glanced at her parents. Or families. A smile touched Montgomery's severe face. Well said. He turned to the board. Shall we put it to a vote? Emma held her breath as hands were raised. 8 in favor, 3 abstaining. 1 against. Congratulations, Montgomery announced. Foster and Associates will back your project, with one condition. What's that? Marcus asked. That Ms. Bennett agrees to cater all our future board meetings. These pastries really are extraordinary. The tension in the room broke as laughter rippled through the board members. Emma felt tears pricking at her eyes as her father hugged her, as her mother joined them, as the board members came forward to shake their hands and ask questions about the project. One more thing, Marcus announced, his arm still around Emma's shoulders. I'd like to propose a slight modification to the project's name. He clicked to a news slide, revealing a logo Emma hadn't seen before. There, in elegant script, were the words, Bennett and James Hotel and Patisserie. Now the tears did fall, but Emma didn't try to hide them. Some moments deserved to be marked with joy as sweet as any dessert she'd ever created. The sound of construction filled the crisp morning air as Sarah walked through what would soon become the hotel's main dining room. Workers carefully removed the circular stained glass window, each piece numbered and catalogued for restoration. Dust motes danced in the streams of early sunlight, and for a moment, Sarah was transported back to another morning, 23 years ago, when different kinds of plans were being dismantled. Penny, for your thoughts? Marcus's voice pulled her back to the present. He stood in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee from Sweet Dreams, a habit he'd developed over the past few months. Just remembering, Sarah admitted, accepting the coffee. The last time I saw you before everything changed. I had so many things I wanted to tell you that morning. Marcus leaned against a newly framed wall. About Emma. I had just found out the day before. I stood at that bus station watching you leave for Boston. The words stuck in my throat. Sarah traced the rim of her coffee cup. I told myself I'd write to you about it, once you were settled. But then your first letter came, full of excitement about your new job, the opportunities. I would have come back, Marcus said softly. The words they'd both been dancing around for months finally surfacing. I know. That's why I couldn't tell you. Sarah turned to face him. You were meant for bigger things, Marcus. I saw it then, and seeing you now, this successful man who can make dreams come true for our daughter, I know I was right about that part. But wrong about thinking I had to choose. Marcus set his coffee down on a nearby windowsill. We could have found a way, Sarah. Together. The construction noise faded to background as they stood in the morning light, 2 decades of unspoken words hanging between them. Mom? Dad? Emma's voice echoed from the foyer. The artisan is here about the stained glass restoration. They found Emma in the entrance hall with an elderly craftsman who was examining pieces of the carefully removed window. Her chef's coat was dusted with flour from her early morning shift at the bakery, but her eyes sparkled with excitement. Mr. Romano says he can not only restore the original pieces but also add the new design elements we discussed, Emma explained. Show them the sketches. The artisan unrolled several detailed drawings. The original Victorian patterns would remain around the edges, but the center would now tell a new story. Delicate pieces of colored glass forming the image of a young woman in a chef's coat, standing between 2 figures whose hands joined to form a heart around her. Emma, Sarah breathed, when did you design this? Actually, Emma smiled. Dad did. He worked with Mr. Romano on the concept. Sarah turned to Marcus, who looked almost embarrassed. I wanted something that represented all of us, he explained. How we've come together to create something new while preserving what was valuable from the past. The symbolism wasn't lost on any of them. The trick, Mr. Romano added, his weathered hands tracing the design, is joining the old and new glass seamlessly. It takes patience, precision. But when the light hits it just right, he held up a piece of blue glass to the sun streaming through the window. Magic happens. As the artisan discussed technical details with Emma, Sarah found herself studying Marcus's profile, seeing both the young man she'd loved and the mature man he'd become. You've changed, she said quietly. Having a daughter will do that to you, Marcus replied. Having a second chance will do that to you. Is that what this is? A second chance? Before Marcus could answer, Emma called them over to approve some color choices for the new glass. As they stood there, the 3 of them discussing shades of blue and gold, Sarah felt something shift inside her, like pieces of her own heart-stained glass window slowly coming together in a new pattern. Later, as the sun began to set, they stood in the future dining room, watching workers carefully pack away the last pieces of the old window. The space felt different without it, more open, more full of possibility. It'll take about 6 weeks for the restoration and new work, Emma informed them, checking her notes. Just in time for the spring opening. Perfect timing, Marcus nodded. The rooms upstairs should be finished by then, and the kitchen equipment arrives next month. Sarah watched their daughter flip through her project notebook, every bit as detail-oriented as her father, yet with an artist's soul that reminded Sarah of herself at that age. You know, Emma said suddenly, looking up, we should document this. The whole restoration process. For the hotel's website, yes, but also for us. Our story is part of this place now. Speaking of our story, Marcus said, reaching into his jacket pocket. I found something yesterday. He pulled out an old, worn envelope. It was in a box of things from my first apartment in Boston. Sarah recognized her own handwriting immediately. The last letter she'd sent him. The one she'd written and rewritten a dozen times, trying to find the courage to tell him about the baby, but ultimately filling it with safe, distant words instead. I kept all of them, Marcus admitted. Every letter. I just couldn't bring myself to throw them away, even after we lost touch. I kept yours too, Sarah whispered. Emma found them in the attic when she was 16. That's when I finally told her everything about you. Emma looked between her parents, seeing the weight of the past and the promise of the future in their eyes. Maybe, she suggested gently, we could add some letters to the hotel story. Not the private ones, but new ones. About why we chose to restore this place. About what we hope it becomes. Future letters instead of past ones? Sarah smiled. I'd like that. We could seal them in the walls, Marcus suggested, warming to the idea. Like a time capsule. Something for future generations to find. The setting sun painted the room in shades of amber and rose, a preview of how it would look once the new window was installed. Emma pulled 3 note cards from her ever-present notebook. "No time like the present," she said, handing one to each of her parents. "Let's write our hopes for this place, for us." As they sat in the construction dust, writing by the light of their phone screens, Sarah felt tears rolling down her cheeks. Not tears of regret this time, but of gratitude, for second chances, for restored dreams, for love that, like stained glass, could be carefully pieced back together into something even more beautiful than before. The morning of the Bennett and James Hotel and Pastry's grand opening dawned clear and bright, spring sunshine streaming through the newly restored stained glass window and painting the dining room in kaleidoscope colors. Emma stood in her pristine chef's whites, surveying the space that had transformed from a dream sketched on flour-dusted paper into stunning reality. The antique tables gleamed beneath crisp white linens, each one set with vintage china carefully curated from estate sales. Fresh flowers in crystal vases echoed the colors from the stained glass above, blues, golds, and soft roses catching the morning light. The display cases in the adjoining patisserie sparkled, waiting to be filled with the hundreds of pastries her team had spent the night preparing. "Everything ready in the kitchen?" Sarah asked, appearing beside her daughter. She wore an elegant navy suit, her silver-streaked hair swept up elegantly, the old locket nestled at her throat. "Almost," Emma smiled, touching her own locket, a gift from both her parents on her last birthday. "The morning pastries are done, the brunch service is prepped, and the special celebration cake is just waiting for its final touches." They walked together through the restored mansion, their heels clicking on the original hardwood floors that now gleamed like honey in the morning light. Each guest room told its own story, some with views of the gardens, others with window seats perfect for reading, all blending modern luxury with historic charm. The sunset suite in the turret remained Emma's favorite, its panoramic windows offering a view that had once existed only in her imagination. Miss Bennett? One of her pastry chefs appeared, slightly flour-dusted. The first delivery from Sweet Dreams just arrived. "Charlotte's here too." Emma hurried to the kitchen, where she found her mentor arranging the last batch of her famous Danish pastries, alongside Emma's own creations. The 2 bakeries would work in tandem now, Sweet Dreams continuing to serve its loyal neighborhood customers while providing special items for the hotel. "Oh, honey," Charlotte breathed, looking around the state-of-the-art kitchen. "It's even more beautiful than you described. I learned from the best," Emma hugged her, "both about baking and about following your dreams." The sound of familiar footsteps made them both turn. Marcus stood in the doorway, impeccable in his suit, but with an uncharacteristic nervousness about him. "Emma, could you come with me for a moment? Both of you?" he asked, looking at Sarah too. "There's something I want to show you before the guests arrive." He led them up the grand staircase to a previously locked room on the 2nd floor. A small plaque beside the door read, "Family Suite." "I had this added to the plans," he explained, unlocking the door. "A private space, just for us." The suite opened into a warm sitting room with comfortable sofas and a small kitchen nook. But it was the walls that drew their attention, covered with photographs documenting their journey. Emma's childhood pictures, her culinary school graduation, the day Marcus walked into Sweet Dreams, the construction process, and countless small moments in between. "I retrieved these from both your albums," Marcus admitted. "I wanted a place where our whole story could live." Sarah moved closer to one photo, Marcus and Emma covered in flour during a failed attempt at croissant making, both laughing despite the mess. Next to it hung a picture from last Christmas, the 3 of them in front of the mansion's restored facade, snow falling gently around them. "There's room for more," Marcus added softly. "Many more." The sound of cars pulling up outside drew them to the windows. The first guests were arriving for the grand opening celebration, local dignitaries, press, friends, and family. "Ready?" Marcus asked, offering an arm to each of his favorite women. They descended the stairs together, stepping into the foyer just as the first guests entered. The gasps of appreciation made Emma's heart swell with pride. Everything was perfect, from the restored chandelier to the subtle scent of fresh pastries wafting from the kitchen. As Emma moved through the crowds, accepting congratulations and answering questions, she kept catching glimpses of her parents. They moved in their own orbits, but somehow always in sync, like planets that had finally found their proper alignment. She watched as Marcus guided Sarah to the center of the dining room, directly under the stained glass window, where their figures now danced in colored light. The celebration cake was wheeled out, an architectural masterpiece replicating the mansion in sugar and fondant. Each detail perfect down to the tiny stained glass window made of pulled sugar. Emma had worked on it for weeks, pouring all her skill and love into every layer. "A toast," Marcus called out, raising his glass. "To dreams that take time to rise, to families that can be restored, and to love that, like the finest pastries, only gets better with patience and care. To the Bennett and James," the crowd echoed, glasses clinking. Later, as the sun began to set and the last guests departed, Emma found her parents in the dining room. They stood beneath the stained glass window, its colors painting them in soft light, their hands clasped together as they watched the day's last rays bring the scene above them to glowing life. Without a word, Emma joined them, fitting perfectly between them, as she had in the window's design. Together they watched as the light shifted, turning their joined figures in the glass into a dance of color and shadow. "You know what this reminds me of?" Sarah said softly. "That carnival where Marcus gave me the locket. Remember? The way the lights painted everything in different colors?" "I remember," Marcus smiled. "I was so nervous about giving you that necklace. And now look." Emma touched both their lockets. 3 identical pieces of silver catching the light. Some things come full circle. Through the window, they could see the hotel's sign illuminated for the first time. Bennett and James Hotel and Patisserie, glowing warmly in the dusk. Below it, in smaller letters, was the tagline Emma had chosen. "Where sweet dreams come true." "They do, don't they?" Sarah whispered, squeezing her daughter's hand. "Sweet dreams really do come true." "No," Emma corrected gently, looking between her mother and father. "We make them come true. Together." Above them, the stained glass family danced in the last light of day, their colored shadows twirling across the floor like promises kept, dreams fulfilled, and love restored, piece by piece, color by color, sweet moment by sweet moment.